and welcome to this episode of The Relationship Hub. Today I'm joined by Andy and Fee Baines, who have kindly agreed to tell me their story about their relationship, how it began, what marriage has been like for them over the years, and how they've navigated some of the differences along the way. So Andy and Fee Baines, it's really lovely to see you. Thank you ever so much for agreeing to allow me to ask you questions about your relationship.
Thank you for having us.
Delighted to be with you.
Excellent. That's a great start, isn't it? Very good. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Can you tell me a little bit about how you met?
Well, it was about 29 years ago now. And a friend of mine said, you've got to go to this meeting. Now, I ran a church youth group at the time, and there was like a town-wide event on a Saturday morning. I rocked up anyway, and Fee was there. And I was like, oh. And so I then became slightly obsessed with her, I think. I was driving my friends mad because I just kept talking about Fee and how much I just liked her. And they said, for goodness sake, ask her out. So one evening I plucked up the courage, rung her up. Her mother answered because she was out. That wasn't a good start. But then later on that evening, she called me back. So I thought that was a positive sign.
Excellent. And Fee, how did you feel about all of this? What were your thoughts about Andy at that time?
Oh yeah, I liked him. But the funny thing was, he invited. So when he rang me up, he said, "Oh, I thought you could come over for dinner and we could talk about youth work." And and I really thought that was actually the truth. And so we got to the dinner, and he'd done this beautiful 3-course dinner with different types of wine. And I was so young and naive at the time that I thought, wow, he's really living the life here.
So how old were you, Andy, when you did this 3-course meal with candles and so on?
Yeah, he'd have been about 22, 23.
It's beef stroganoff, fillet steak.
Wow, very fancy, isn't it, for a 22-year-old?
She was worth it.
So you kind of had this kind of 3-course meal, and where did it go from there? Having had the meal together as well, I guess you find out quite a bit about each other. What do you think it was that really attracted you to one another?
I think it was the fact that we could talk about anything, and I've not really met guys that you could do that with. He very quickly became my best friend, and when I say about talk about everything, there was a lot of laughter in that, a lot of humor, a lot of irreverence, a lot of mucking about, I suppose, as well as the kind of just general things that you talk about with my girlfriends. That it was the same sort of stuff that we were talking about as well, and so that's where the connection came.
And that's so nice. Sorry, Andy, just to emphasise, that friendship element is so important. And I think, if there's a really good friendship, it's a good way to start, isn't it? Andy, what were you going to say?
Well, yeah, and I think it was like that. I found like my best friend, it felt like, which was great. And, she was so funny, and she did impressions, and it was just, I just thought, wow. And she drank pints of beer. We would go into a pub when you could do such things, and there'd be an array of the different ales on the bar. And if she didn't like some of them, she'd say, "Well, can we go to another pub?" So, and she still drinks pints. So that might have clinched it for me.
So it was this combination of the impressionist alongside the beer drinking woman that was before you. Yeah. Well, say no more. We could finish here, really, couldn't we? I think, that's marvellous. So okay, going from those initial attractions, that friendship that's building up, how did you get to the point of knowing that you were ready to be married? What was that process like? How do you know that person is the person?
I think because we'd met our best friend, we knew straight away. We had a conversation about getting married within 6 weeks of going out, because we knew we'd met our best friend, and it was like, that's it now. We want to. I want to keep this going. Why would we want anything else? So, and we knew that we both wanted to be married at some point. So, we thought we started the conversation. We ended up getting married a bit sooner than we kind of thought, only just because of home circumstances, and it just worked out that way. So we got married 18 months after we first started going out. So it was quite quick in the end. But it was just like, well, we've met our best friend, why not just get on with it, really?
We knew quite quickly, didn't we? I mean, within a few weeks, really, we were talking about marriage. I mean, I'd had probably a couple of what I'd call serious girlfriends beforehand. That's like a year or more. And there was just something different about my relationship with Fee. I'm not quite sure what it was, but we both were talking about marriage, very, very early on, really.
I think it's really interesting because almost the moment actually, Fee, you said, and you've said as well, Andy, we knew quite quickly. That's like the sort of, the real sort of treasure that people look for, isn't it? Because you just said, we just knew quite quickly. And that's the kind of the big question people ask. And you knew really and truthfully very little about each other, as some people would see it, that you need to be together for a long time. How would you explain that? Do you think that's a good idea to think, okay, let's start talking about this so soon? Or because some people would be scared of talking about it as well. They're worried about how they would come across. And do you know what I mean? It's like today, I think most people would be quite surprised if someone said after 6 weeks, I think let's get married. I mean, how on earth did it even come up between you?
It's interesting, because our daughter's the same. She started dating someone at 16 and they had a similar conversation. They knew very quickly and they were very intentional about it. I think for us, the fact that we were able to tell each other everything, there was no secrets. We felt quite open and honest and nothing to hide, really. So I think that was why we knew each other. We were best friends. I
think we shared to quite a deep level. I mean, you can have a conversation with somebody, you could spend weeks with somebody and not go deep, just talk about superficial things. But I think we had quite deep and sort of meaningful conversations quite early on. And that was...
And I would say that was more than the kind of heady kind of love thing, really. I mean, we were really attracted to each other, but actually it was that friendship that was the connection and that made us want to be together.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you. And obviously, wedding came along. Was it a good day? Did that all go well? I mean, had you always dreamed of a big wedding, or how did that come into play?
Well, it nearly didn't happen because we got engaged on the Monday of a week, and on the Friday I was made redundant. So I lost my job. So it was almost like, is this a bump in the road? Can we navigate through this one? But we decided to carry on, and we did.
We had 5 months to plan our wedding. Yeah.
Well, do you know why not? There's lots of different opinions on this, aren't there, about how long it should take, and some people plan for 2 years because they need this venue and that venue. But actually, when it's about being married and that coming together and thinking, okay, we're going to make a point of commitment, well, why wait for such a big, long time,
Exactly. And actually, it came together, all of those planner things were out the window because we didn't have 12 months. But, it all came together. We got the date, we got the venue, and it was great. It was a beautiful day. It rained. It
was a beautiful day.
Which my nan still reminded us of for years afterwards. We were very happy. It was beautiful.
Very good. So obviously you met, you were attracted to each other. Fee, you were doing these amazing impressions that I imagine carried on through into those early married years. So presumably everything, was brilliant. It's the fairy tale. It's the happy ever after. It's the bit you don't get to see when Cinderella gets married. It all goes like a dream, doesn't it? How was it for you?
Well, there was this thing that happened about 6 months after so we did marriage prep, which I do highly recommend. But I think there was a bit of naivety in it that we'd done the marriage prep, tick, and we've got married, tick, and now we live happily ever after. Yeah. And actually, what the reality was that Andy had his own house. I'd moved in. I'm not a particularly tidy person. I'd moved in with all my stuff. I hadn't unpacked most of it. And we were just getting used to actually, this is not actually happily ever after. We're actually quite different. And there's a few things that are actually a bit tricky. And so 6 months afterwards, so when we did marriage prep, a couple came in who were newlyweds to tell us exactly what it was like and how wonderful it was. And then 6 months after we were married, we needed to do the same thing. So we went into this group, and we had the worst argument we'd had in our entire married life so far. And we then had to go in and put our smiley faces on and say, it's great.
And I was on message still trying to be positive about the experience of being married, and Fee was, this is a trait of Fee. Fee will sort of wear a heart on her sleeve and be very honest. And in those first few weeks and months when we were married, people would naturally come up to you and say, how's married life treating you and how's it going? And Fee would just be straight in there with, well, it's actually quite hard work. And, it's not quite what I was expecting. And even occasionally saying, I'm not even sure that I've married the right person. And often I'd be still when she said that. So it was like, okay, we're being that honest, are we? So
that's quite a statement, Fee, isn't it? To say, I mean, first of all, I really commend you when people ask you, how's it going? You say, well, actually, it's quite hard. Because I think the problem is people imagine that is the big fairy tale, and they look at you and you look like the perfect couple, and it's, and it's all wonderful. And the reality is it isn't easy. But that's saying to somebody, have I married the right person? I mean, they must have thought, I wish I'd never asked. I mean, how did that conversation go? I mean, how did you follow up on that, Andy? You obviously knew about this. So what happened from there?
Well, I mean, I've actually got, as the years go on, a lot more open and honest and happy to talk about stuff myself. But I think I was, just that insecurity, I suppose, really, at the beginning of the relationship. And actually, you're saying this to people, but it is good to share things. I mean, we all know that marriage is worth it, but it doesn't mean that it's not at times, something you have to really invest in. And we were so different. I mean, the biggest thing that Fee and I have had arguments about over our 28 years of being married is tidiness. I am, Fee would say overly tidy. I would say I'm, just naturally tidy. And I'm one of those people that if a room's a mess, I can't just sit in it. It has to be tidy before I can relax. And Fee, less so, really.
I don't really see it.
Yeah, over the years, she's got
too short.
A bit more tidy. At least that's what she tells me. And I've got a bit more relaxed about it. But that was a real difference between a silly thing that over the years has just been this little. Often there's other things behind it, but it's the tidiness that's like the catalyst that means you have a little bit of a discussion.
Yeah, I think Andy, like, it helps him feel in control, and whereas for me, it's I think when I feel I have to be a certain way, it stifles my creativity a bit. But I think in those early days, just going back to that for a moment, I think we just were so naive. We just had no idea how to do relationships. And so, suddenly to see that we did have these big differences, it was just a bit of and we didn't know what to do with it, which is probably why I was so open with other people, because I was a bit like, somebody help me, because I have no idea what I'm doing here. Have I made a mistake? I definitely thought that, and I think we both did at times, because although we still really cared for each other, we just didn't know what to do with that. So I think we were naive. I was very naive.
Yeah, as you say, it was almost perhaps a cry for help, because it's reasonable to think, well, hang on a second, we're really very different in these ways. Is it going to work then? But the difference is, of course, is that how many years have you been married for now?
28. So
you're now 28 years on. Presumably the kind of statement of have I married the right person doesn't come up very often anymore, I hope so. But how did you go from there?
It doesn't come up, but I wouldn't say that it's because we're committed to the long term, but we're normal people. We do have moments of, can I live with this person forever? So sorry, I missed your question because I was too busy thinking about that.
Well, I was just thinking, obviously, that's something you said then because you were navigating those early days, the differences were there. You're thinking, are the differences potentially going to separate us in some way?
Shall I start on that one? I mean, we had children quite early on after we got married, a son and a daughter, 18 months apart. We'd moved down from where we used to live in Kent down to the south coast. So our support network and parents weren't with us. I also started my own business at the same time. So it was all bonkers, really.
Yeah.
I didn't sleep particularly well. And so we did go through quite a phase of being...
I had postnatal depression.
Just surviving, really, existing, being like housemates and a mum and a dad rather than being like a couple. Just really hard. And we actually did talk about divorce at one point, because it was that miserable, really, just existing. But we got beyond that, and we got to 10 years of marriage, and it was a time to celebrate. We thought we worked hard at 10 years, and it was things were a bit better. The kids were a bit older, and that physicality of childcare was easier. I wanted to go away on a holiday, just Fee and I, which is a normal thing to do.
Sounds good.
It sounds good. It's what you do. But Fee decided that we should go on a marriage enrichment weekend, which was a different way of celebrating. We did both in the end, but I was certainly dragged reasonably kicking and screaming.
I think my thought process behind that was that as Andy said, we were really surprised to find ourselves thinking about divorce. We'd never had anticipated that. We really had thought when we got married, our marriage would last forever. So it was really surprising to find ourselves in that position. And then when we got beyond the decision of staying together, which was mostly because we couldn't be doing with one of us looking after the kids on our own, but because of that commitment, then that kept us going until we went on the marriage weekend. But I think what the commitment was keeping us going, but it wasn't actually helping us flourish, and that's the difference that the marriage weekend made.
And there's a few things I want to pick up on, really. Partly that sense of, I think you just said, Andy, that you're almost, when you're bringing up children, at times it felt like you're a bit like housemates, and that then question of divorce, can you should this carry on? And again, I think these are the sorts of things that don't actually come up very often, do they, in conversation? Because partly, if you're just chatting how things, you wouldn't necessarily come out with that. But I think in friendships as well, I think it's important that people are a bit more real about some of this stuff, because everyone needs a little bit of a helping hand and some support. And I think most people think that even if you think about divorce, it's the most awful thing. And I think obviously it's not a great sign about your relationship to be thinking about it, but having a conversation about feeling a bit desperate is a way in which you can then build and come out of it. And I just wanted to highlight that, because I think for anybody listening who perhaps has felt like they're housemates and that parenting has been tough, because parenting is challenging. It's the most wonderful and the most difficult thing in life almost at times, isn't it? To do that together and feel in some ways a bit estranged throughout that period. I'm sure so many people will relate to that. But the fact that you then carried on and thought, no, we need to do something. And the marriage enrichment. I mean, Andy, you kind of said, Andy's Fee said about this marriage enrichment, and you were thinking a nice holiday. I think a lot of blokes would be going, what? Are you serious? I don't want to go and want something like that. I've got to talk about things, or, it sounds really awkward. And I mean, what was it like? Was it awkward? Did you feel like a bit of an idiot, or was it fine, or was it girly, or do you know what I mean? It's those sorts of things that come up.
I think once I was there, I was committed to it. There was no going back. We decided to do it, so I was there. And
it was actually me who had regrets once we got there.
You were quite so sure. But
what have I done?
I think the good thing was that it wasn't group therapy. We had to talk a lot about our relationship, but only to each other. Right. So it just sort of gave you that framework, gave you that space. There's all sorts of conversations that we know we need to have, but we never quite get around to having them. And it just, and it was a framework. It was a safe place. The people who led it were great. And for Fee and I, it was a bit like pressing the reset button, really, on our relationship. I think forgiveness was key. Not that one of us had done anything awful, but just over those years being quite just selfish and self-preservation. I've had the children for an hour, and children don't have them for an hour. It's not fair. Looking out for ourselves, not each other. And so we could just literally sort of forgive each other for 10 years of all the things that we hadn't done helpfully with each other, the times we had let each other down, and just press the reset button, really, on our marriage. And so we came away from that very different. And our friends and family, people who knew us really well, could see something had fundamentally changed in our relationship. And several of them went on a marriage weekend themselves. So that was a good
You're a good advert for it then, for sure. And it is interesting, isn't it? Because I do think that in so many areas of life, whether it's our work or whether it's to do with parenting or whatever it might be, we do kind of want to check in and see how things are going. If at work you want to make sure you're doing your job well, you might have a bit of a progress report, you might, see your manager or something, or, whether it's parenting, we look things up, we kind of might go on a course, or you might read some books about it. And I do sometimes feel as though people feel that with marriage, you should just somehow get it because, well, you love each other, so therefore it should all be fine. But, with parenting, you've never had a child before, this is all new, but just loving each other, and that's true, why should it, why should there be any problems? And actually going on a course like that, I just think it's great that you did that. I think it's a lovely part of your story because you're taking away that sense of, oh, it's awkward or you shouldn't do it. You're kind of living proof that actually it's such a good thing for couples to kind of check in with each other in that way. So actually investing in your relationship is great. So thank you for telling me that part of your story because I think it's brilliant. So, Fee, I assume you felt the same benefits having said all of that. Now you're going to say to me, well, it was a bit, give or take.
For sure. And it's had long-lasting consequences for us. And the hard work we put in there has been a really solid foundation for us. So, Andy was talking about the forgiveness element. Well, we forgave each other just the nitty-gritty of things. And then we came out with a kind of like commitment to forgive each other easily and quickly.
Keep short accounts.
Going forward to a point where recently I did something that was really not pleasant for Andy. It was I didn't intend it to be quite as bad as it was, but he was quite hurt by it at the time, and to a point where he said, I think I'm going to need to just go away for a few days and think about this, and then within hours he came back and said, it's okay, I forgive you, because we'd got into that process of forgiving each other quickly and saying sorry quickly. And so stuff like that is massive, actually.
How easy is it though, do you think? Because I think we're here sitting talking, you're not, there's no discussion or difficulty with you at the minute, I assume, unless the room's a bit untidy. Andy, you might not be struggling, might be struggling there, but, I've no idea. But the point is, we're talking about it in an interview situation. Actually, in the moment of needing to forgive somebody, how easy have you found it? How much of it is just, it's fine, I forgive you? Or, how has it been?
I think it's important to separate forgiving somebody and forgetting, because I think we thought for a while that if you forgave somebody something, you just forgot it and it never came up again. And obviously it's impossible. You can't just erase a memory, particularly one that's been painful. But actually, and it's not waiting till you feel like forgiving the person. It's the right thing to do. So you do forgive them. You say, I forgive you. And it might take a while, but when you remember the thing that caused the pain, it hurts. But over time, if you have forgiven the other person, then you don't want to remember the event again, but it hasn't got that, you don't feel that pain, you don't feel that little stab inside when you remember it. So I think, it was just being aware that forgiveness and forgetting were different things you could forgive. And you might not forget straight away, but then the memory isn't painful when you do have it after a while. So.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. What about you, Fee? How have you found it for yourself?
I think the biggest thing we learned on that weekend was about getting into each other's shoes, really trying to see it from each other's point of view, so that you could understand that actually they're not a bad person. They're doing the best with what they've got. And it wasn't done deliberately or maliciously, most of the time, the things that we were doing, that we were forgiving each other. So I think it was that's been really helpful for us. There are massive things that some people have to deal with forgiving. But it's that kind of getting into each other's shoes, understanding where they are coming from. That's been life-changing for us.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think when we feel hurt, it's human nature to kind of dwell on that. It's a bit like if you cut yourself, you go to the wound and you do what you can for your wound, as it were. And I think when you feel wounded in a relationship, it's easy to just kind of fold in on that and feel sorry for yourself. And that's reasonable to feel some sense of, I'm hurt, and to acknowledge that. But the fact that you said about putting yourself in the other person's shoes, that takes a decision, that takes a choice to do that. And I liked what you said, Fee, when you mentioned that you're thinking, actually, Andy isn't out to get you. He's not out to crush you, to make things hard for you. He might have made a mistake, but he wants to do what's right by you, and reminding yourself of the intention of that other person is a really important thing. I think that's a really helpful thing to kind of take home, if you like. And I say it only because I think the reality is it's often the silliest, most stupidest things that can cause couples to drift, if you like. And that's a dangerous place to be, because as soon as you start drifting, then that's when you're in a bit of bother. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
The cleaning tidiness thing. I mean, it's the most petty thing ever, really.
Yeah.
And yes, the biggest thing that we argue about.
And it's, as you say, is those silly things. And, just if I can, on the note of sort of differences and so on, I think it'd just be worth just having a quick conversation about that as well, because obviously there's these things about opposites attract, and then other people say, you need to have lots in common, and you need to, to be able to share lots of those sorts of moments. Otherwise, what will you do for fun? How will you hang out? What's been your experience for you guys in terms of where you're different and got different hobbies or interests and the things that are similar? How have you worked through that?
I think all those things are true. I think opposites do often attract, but then you do need to have some commonality somewhere, to come back to. So like if you're going to have a date night together, and that's something that we try and do regularly to keep investing with each other, you need to be able to agree on the thing you both like doing. But it's also really healthy as well to have different interests and to have different things and to have some space, because we actually work from home doing different jobs, but we're 24/7 with each other. So actually it's really important for us that we've got some different interests, we've got different ways that we want to spend our leisure time, because otherwise we'll be together all the time. So it's actually great when one of us, it might sound weird, but actually has to go away for a particular reason, for work or something, because it gives the other one, or gives each of us, a chance to miss each other. Actually look forward to that time we're going to be together again, and we can share stories that's happened and stuff. So I think it's about having some things that you can do together and enjoy, similar passions and interests, but also plenty of things that are different, because that keeps you interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, we have to choose. I think again it's a bit of a choice thing, like the whole choosing to forgive, choosing to see the areas in which we do connect rather than the areas. I think whenever we've gone through a slippery process, where things aren't great, it's often because we're choosing to see the differences and choosing to see where we're not connecting, and we have to choose to get back into that. Well, where do we connect? What can we do? I've got some friends who don't ever watch the telly together because they don't like the same stuff. Well, there is a lot of stuff that Andy and I, he likes. We have a joke about shows that have got upsetting scenes in them, and it's like, it's another show with upsetting scenes, whatever. And I'm maybe I'm a bit tamer or whatever, but we have to choose to find things that we will like to watching together, and there are things
I'll do Bake Off, I won't do Strictly, so
it's true.
That's fair enough. So we need to kind of come to an end in a moment. And I'm just reflecting on some of the things you've said about, I guess, what's made your relationship work and last. One is, I can see the real commitment that you've had from the very beginning to one another, to your marriage and what that's meant to you. The fact that you've had those wobbles where you're saying, am I married to the right person? Should we get divorced at a later stage? But have carried on through that. You've talked about forgiveness being a really important part of your relationship and important for all relationships, and friendships been very significant for you as well, and learning to navigate the differences. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that little list there of, okay, how have you managed to still be here after 28 years? Because I've in work I've done before, I've worked with young people talking about relationships, and often they're quite surprised that people can stay together. And they see it maybe as a little more unusual. And I think actually there's a lot more of it than people realise. So what's been, what would you say has been the reason that you're still here, happily married, to quote that phrase after 28 years?
Well, it is investing in each other and still, going out for date nights. I mean, wooing each other, whatever the modern word is, that sounds like Victorian, but, it bothering to actually think about how can you creatively spend some time together. And
having fun together.
Yeah, any opportunity to sort of press the pause.
Yay, fun, good idea.
Yeah, hectic life. I mean, if we go through a period where it's all a bit serious and the fun's gone out of our relationship. So it's just a bit fun in creative ways, because most couples who do separate, sometimes it is the classic, some affair or some big thing, but usually they just drift apart and they haven't, because they're not investing time, they're not intentional about it. And so suddenly they think we've got nothing in common, we don't really like each other. So
yeah. Cheeky midweek G&Ts on the sofa here are highly recommended.
Sounds like a very, very good idea. And well, it's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Before we finish, perhaps you might like to say something about what you do, because actually part of your journey has changed what you do now, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, that marriage organisation that ran the marriage weekend we went on after 10 years of marriage, we now lead that organisation. So we're called Time for Marriage, and we run marriage enrichment weekends online currently. And basically, we have all sorts of couples who've got a great marriage and just want to invest something, all the way through to couples who, the season they're going through, there's some tough stuff. And just a joy to just try and facilitate a weekend that will just help them to have those important and hopefully useful discussions with each other.
Brilliant. It's great. Thank you so very much. Really lovely to talk to you both. Really interesting to hear your story. And I'm convinced it will be such an encouragement to people who are listening, just to hear the realities of real life marriage. So thank you, Andy and Fee.
Our pleasure.